It's good to make mistakes, right? That's what we all want. We all want mistakes.
Happy accidents. I'm sorry.
Oh, I think these are a little too loud here. Hold on. Let me, the music's a tad loud because the music's getting complicated anyways. So let me turn that right down. Okay. So, now I'm really soft. Pook, are you soft? Can you say something?
Hello. Testing my levels.
All right, so now we're good. Okay, yep. That's what I get when for the first time I try to use special software. Thank you so much, Luke, and everybody else for wishing me a happy birthday. It is very
I did not
appreciated.
get a chance to do that. I'm sorry. Happy birthday.
It's been a pretty good birthday so far, considering that I had to work today. But now I get to do something really cool. I get to talk about one of my favorite games of all time. So,
Shadowrun.
Shadowrun's a great universe. I love the Shadowrun universe quite a bit. Thank you for the bits, Kung Fu Fenders. It's appreciated. But Shadowrun's mechanics just... I can't.
I'm with you on that, and I'm totally here for... I hate to say a more simplistic game like Changeling. But in comparison, definitely. So,
well, we are in for it today because, folks, today what we are going to be doing is we're going to be discussing Changeling the Dreaming 20th Anniversary Edition, which is a game that has come from quite an interesting background. Changeling is a game that was introduced into the World of Darkness lineup after such mainstays as Vampire and Werewolf and Mage. And it, in fact, never even got a revised edition. It got a second edition, and then that's sort of where it stopped. It didn't get a chance to get a revised edition because White Wolf kind of gave up on it. And then Dark Ages Fae and Changeling the Lost happened. And it proved that there was some interest in the sort of more fantastical elements of modern fantasy, and Onyx Path picked it up for Changeling the Dreaming 20th Anniversary Edition, and here we are. How long have you been playing this game?
I have been playing Changeling since 2003.
2003. I have been playing Changeling. This is not trying to one-up you or anything. That's not the game here. But I've been playing Changeling since 1990. Oh boy. When was it? I guess it was 1996, 97. And the first place that I really played a whole lot of Changeling, I was introduced to it by my older sister, and I was like super interested in it, and I read the book backwards and forwards like 900 times. But where I really got into it, the first game that I played was actually as part of the White Wolf online chat.
I came into it just after that. Well, obviously 2003, much later. But I was aware of Vampire. I had played Vampire once at the LGS, the local game store, as they were kicking up a one shot that night, and handed me a pre-made character that was a Bruja that did not make it the first hour. I quickly played myself into a final death, not quite knowing what I was doing, and got up and walked away from the table and was like, "Oh, that Vampire game was fun." and didn't touch World of Darkness again until I rediscovered it in around 2002.
Final Death was what was your first experience, and you were like, "Oh, that's pretty fun."
Yeah. I was like, okay, that's that was like, that's a game. I don't quite know what people see in that. And in around 2002, I was kind of exposed to like the idea of World of Darkness because the site that I roleplayed on online had various games running in different places. And like, players would talk to each other out of character or otherwise in between these game rooms. And they'd be talking about what they were doing. But the Changeling, the Changeling the Dreaming second edition core book was the actual last birthday gift I received from my mom. And so it was just something I showed interest in. She surprised me with it, and I've played it ever since.
Well, that's quite honestly one of the best reasons to play. Is just having it close to you like that. So I'm glad that you're here to talk about it with me. So why are we talking about Changeling today? We're talking about Changeling, and also we're really thankful, Pook, that we managed to catch you for this. Is that we're actually launching our own live 24/7 Discord chat that is a game of Changeling the Dreaming. That people can join in and play whenever they want with whoever happens to be there at any point in time. A persistent world. We're doing this as kind of like an experiment to see what's going on, because we're trying to bring back the old sort of chat atmospheres of old, but with a more curated community with way more safety tools in place, all of that stuff. So that's what we're attempting to do, and I'm thrilled that we're going to get a chance to introduce a lot of people to this game. And that's commands may not work at the moment, Crosshair. I'd have to turn them on. So here, you know what? Pook can talk for a second while I do that, and I'll just finish this kind of intro. But yeah, we're looking forward to having as many people as we can handle come and play. And we're launching this server by the end of the month. So I will I'm really looking forward to doing that, but it's also just, it's a game that I love, and sharing it with people is going to be great. So that's what we're doing here today. We're going to kind of do a primer on Changeling, get an idea of what it is, what kind of a game it is, the main things that people need to know. And then after that, we're going to go into sanctioning our first PC, and that's you, Pook.
Yes, absolutely. I'm really looking forward to this. Obviously, like I said, Changeling is important to me, but I haven't had a game like it's this style of game, the persistent world kind of game, that many people might not be familiar with, because a lot of play is usually done in sessions around tables, or the more traditional style of tabletop role playing. But this is kind of how I learned to play World of Darkness, is games similar to this, where even when I wasn't at the game kept moving and you could come back to it. And there's a weird kind of charm to that. But it also allows you to kick up more things on a more personal or like social level with your characters as well, that you might not experience in the constrained times you have scheduled to meet in person. So I'm really looking forward to that, but it's one of those things that's very, very driven by the people in it. So really hoping that I see a lot of excitement and a lot of interest that you all do, come join, because that's what'll keep something like this going.
It is a very different way of role-playing than when you're just in a small group sitting around a table, hanging out and chilling with just one storyteller. This is alternately kind of like it's an easier way to play, in that it's, for the most part, the game is social, and you don't have to know all that much about mechanics. You don't have to know that much about the actual rules behind it, because then you get a chance to just sort of play and enjoy. But then on the other hand, there's also that sort of, it's a different beast in that you're playing for yourself. if you're playing in a mass game versus a small game, there's a big shift, because in a small game, you are kind of like the protagonist by default, right? The storyteller is focusing on you and the other people at the table. Whereas in a mass game where you have a lot of players, then that sort of fades away. You don't get the specialized attention, and so you kind of have to make your own fun. But in a way, it can also be very rewarding, because you get to track a character over the course of time, and it can be quite engaging that you're not just playing against, quote unquote, the storyteller, but also every other player in the game. Even if you're not actually versus them, they're there and contributing to the stories in ways that just aren't possible in a tabletop.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I just see my name. I just see my highlights in chat because Crosshair.
The bot's up now, Crosshair. My apologies for that. But anyway, okay. Where do we begin with this game? First of all, what's the World of Darkness to you, Pook?
The World of Darkness is the World of Darkness is, of course, they sell it as like our world but darker. I don't think that in modern nights we need a lot of reasons to actually adjust things darker.
Claim that it's darker, yeah.
And the World of Darkness always felt like it was a reason to explore counterculture for the point of rebelling against the things that were dark. While the game sold you on being dark, you were supposed to be more aware of why it's dark and why that dark is necessarily not a good thing. Stylishly dark, yes. These days I feel it's more along the lines of it's our world, but some of those conspiracies being passed around actually have some actual weight behind them. Whether they're, things in the shadows are actually in the shadows. But I don't really know, like, I would say that I would say that Changeling specifically is about not losing sight of, while I feel like Changeling itself is a dark game, it's about not losing sight of like what makes all of it worthwhile. Like, why are we doing this?
Right. Well, to sort of distill what you said, the World of Darkness is a setting that you were here all along, Weirdness. We doubt nothing. The World of Darkness is essentially a pattern on our own world. If you can imagine a game world where you'll have cities and dungeons and all that for a game like Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons, the World of Darkness takes place on Earth, modern day, 2021. The cities are the same, the places are the same, the politics are the same, but just shifted in a little way that we can take some dramatic license here and there. It's true that the World of Darkness originally it's the same world, but a little darker, a little edgier. These days, we don't necessarily have to go that far. It's kind of, we can choose to what level we want to turn the darkness down on the world or not, right? We can have the World of Darkness. We could also have the world of insufficient light if we really cared. But Changeling, it fits in kind of a unique place in this world where there are vampires and werewolves and mages all kind of operating under the surface. General humanity aren't aware that there are these supernaturals that lurk among them. But if werewolf is a game of savage horror, and if vampire is a game of personal horror, and mage is kind of a more cerebral game of the possibilities of will, Changeling is a game of modern fantasy. And modern fantasy in this context specifically is this is a game where while you have a life in the world as normal, you have a double life, a secret life, as it were, because you are not quite human. What is a changeling?
Changeling is the wonderful amalgamation of a fairy born in a fairy soul born in a human body. They've lived. Where do I start with this? The Fae originally lived in a place called Arcadia. Let's just throw that out there. For reasons that no one knows exactly why. They were either cast out, they lost access to it. It is something that they are cut off from. We can have a show alone about Arcadia and its nature. But just know that they were otherworldly beings, in this case, the otherworld being the Dreaming, which is humanity's collective imagination, in a way. A little bit more than that. John might have more words on that. Needless to say, they are stranded here, and they needed to find a way to survive, and they did that by taking up mortal flesh, and they are born. Changelings are born as people who one day awaken to their fairy nature through one event or another called the chrysalis, and must then live a dual life between the fantastical and the mundane. And try to strike a proper balance between those two things, because everything about it being modern fantasy is quite literally the descriptor of the game. Everything you know about medieval fantasy, imagine trying to live that life in the present day. There are lords and ladies, there are castles, there are dragons, there are everything about all of those fun medieval storybooks, but they're in the modern world.
If you can imagine something as fantastic as a boggin, like a halfling, the fearsome redcaps, the hungry redcaps, trickster puka, the elegant she, all kinds of creatures from mythology and folklore, and that they are forced, because of a world which is starting to reject the idea of dreams and more towards the idea of practicality and stasis, they have to fuse their souls with those of humanity. They have to live inside human shells in order to survive in this world. And it creates a duality of the world itself. To you and me, Pook, normal people, if we look around, you can look directly at a changeling and all you'll see is a human. And you'll know that human from who they are in their normal lives. Who look at me, and I am John Verrill, and I look just like this on this camera as you see it now. But if I were a changeling to another changeling, I would have a different appearance, my changeling mien, as it were, and it would overlay on top of my real appearance, and then I might appear gaunt, stricken, hollow cheeks. Maybe I can only speak in a whisper, and I take on the appearance of a slua. Or my ears might elongate. I move with preternatural grace and beauty. I carry a commanding atmosphere around me. I am one of the she. And knowing that you can have this kind of duality also means that changelings can see the world around them, and the hidden underlying nature of the dreaming that humans can't see. Creatures known as chimera scurrying around, the idea of there being an overlay that humanity is entirely not aware of, but changelings are. and being unable to fully access that because you have to balance your life between this fantastic world that you're now a part of and your real life. Because if you tip one too far one way or the other, too far into the dreaming or too far into banality, which is that practicality that I was mentioning, you lose the other side. And it's tragic both ways.
And I love that duality. It's actually one of my favorite things is the anachronisms that take place, the having to juggle the dual lives. It basically turns everybody into a secret agent. No. I really love the the concept of the beggar who is actually a wandering knight, or the boiler making weird noises in the basement actually being the roar of a ferocious fire breathing beast. It's the monsters under the bed, but it also at times is the potential of things. It's knowing that what might look like a book that's seen better days and is going into the bargain bin might actually be a glowing relic to you because of how many people it's inspired.
That's right. I'm just going to interrupt you for a second because there's a few questions that are critical coming in.
Okay.
Osab mentions a bit like the Fables comic. Almost. Fables, the thing about Fables is that they're hidden away from humanity because they don't want to risk humanity seeing creatures that can't pass for human. In the world of Changeling, they don't have to hide because humans can't see them. They can't perceive elements of the dreaming. So as Biff the Boss has just said, my understanding is that your face soul changes your appearance but heightens it or makes it fantastical. So as Requiem asks right here, does your changeling form differ greatly from your human form, or is it like, for example, John but a troll or Slua type look? So it does alter your appearance, but it sort of changes it. So if I was a troll, and in the book trolls are described as huge creatures, over 7, 8, or 9 feet tall, very, very strong, I might appear to humanity as somebody who is of above average height, but even not necessarily that. I may have hints of my fey nature that sort of bleed into my real life a little bit, like maybe I'm just a little more jacked than usual, or maybe I have kind of hard edges to my features, but nothing that a human would look at and be like, you look weird. But at the same time, if a changeling looks at me, instead, they would perceive somebody who was 8 feet tall, massive, blue-skinned with horns rising out of my forehead. It's that kind of duality that is sometimes one of the hardest things for players to get a hold of, that you are both of these things at the same time. In earlier editions of Changeling, they even went so far as to say, like, if you didn't duck when you were going under a door, then you would be taking on banality because you were denying that your fey self exists. They've kind of taken that out because it was way too complicated and way too, to be frank, kind of silly to keep track of. But
yeah, because like, how does a puka get a haircut?
That's right, exactly, right? Like, so if scissors come close to you, do they knock you in? It's just more along the lines of intent. So if you go to a barber and that barber is cutting your hair and you have horns in the way, because the barber can't perceive the horns, they don't get in the way. But if you go to a changeling barber, then that changeling will cut around the horns because he does see them and they do exist. So, no, Fae normally cannot hide their own Fae self from other Fae. If you take on a lot of banality, your Fae mean starts to fade away, but that's not like, to do that intentionally would be to basically practically kill yourself so that other people can't find you. That's not really what you would want to do that. You still struggle with satyrs and shoes. So exactly weirdness, right? Like satyrs are changelings who have goat legs, and those goat legs can't put shoes on because they have cloven hooves. But in the real world, you can put shoes on because that's your normal self putting shoes on. You just kind of have to think of it as there's two dimensions to your character, and it is possible to interact with them separately, but typically when you are playing in the game, you're going to be acting as a changeling, so you would basically think of yourself as just having the goat hooves and not worrying about like your pants or shoes that you would be wearing elsewhere.
Yeah, the game is a lot more friendly about that now, and is more literally about the intent and the fact that your character can look past aspects of their appearance to interact with other parts of their other appearance, rather than, you know, complicating it. And so you can see your own feet to put shoes on.
Mm-hmm. And the more that you are in, like, further into the dreaming, if you're in a place of high glamour, or high glamour being sort of the energy of the dreaming itself, or if you're going into a dimension of the dreaming that's away from the physical world, your physical self kind of melts away and no longer matters. In much the same way, if you find yourself in a place of high banality, then your fey self starts to fade away and not matter that much. But typically it's kind of a duality. It's sort of the two at once. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that I saw once again mention of fables, and I think even though it didn't bring in the whole duality concept, I feel like a better form of reference might be the series Once Upon a Time, where they had second lives in the Enchanted Forest that they don't have in Storybrooke, you know, in the mundane world. Mm-hmm. But that's still a little off. But like, yeah, if you're looking for like other forms of media to use as reference.
So Luke is asking a question, which I think is, I'm going to bring it up because I don't actually have a perfect answer for it yet. Would it be okay to be an observer for a while, to learn or understand how it works more before deciding on making a PC? We're not sure yet. I definitely see the point of wanting to observe, but part of it is also we want to make sure that the chat is there for people who are playing, and so that they don't necessarily feel like there's always eyes on what they're doing. And the other thing is that we don't want to encourage out-of-character commentary in character chats, right? So if people are role-playing, that's not really the time for people to be also chatting in the same room out of character, or asking questions out of character. We'll have out-of-character channels for that instead. But I totally get the need to want to do that, so we may look into it. It's possible, Luke, what we may end up doing is we may say that some channels may be open, but you won't be able to post in them. You'll only be able to read them, and the only people who can post are people who have sanctioned characters. So that is possible that we may do that, but we'll have to see, because we are also the idea for us is that if you're in the game, you're in the game and you're playing. We don't really, because one thing that I have seen in the past with these sorts of chats is that if people just start talking out of character, that's all that happens. It's kind of like everybody showing up to play at your house, and you order dinner and you start talking and you start discussing what's happened in your day, and then by the time you're like, I guess we should play, it's already midnight and nobody wants to play anymore and they leave. So I do think, though, that the idea of giving somebody the option of watching, at least in some rooms, there will be some rooms that will be private, right? So if you've decided to go off into a location with another character and you don't want to be overheard, then you may move to a room where other people don't have access, and you won't be able to go into those. But for rooms that are kind of more general meeting places, maybe we'll be able to figure something out for that. Because I do think that for some people it would be nice to see. Because there is one unfortunate reality when it comes to mass games like this, is that we can't always take time to teach everybody in the middle of game. There's going to be too many people playing at once, and while we'll be able to answer some questions, absolutely, especially if they're fast, we won't be able to sort of take somebody by the hand and say, okay, well, let me sit here and teach you about everything while also storytelling for the rest of the group. So a certain amount of you'll need to read the book is in place, and we cannot teach you mechanics one-on-one. We just simply won't have the time. But yeah, there is, or you can just watch us play Changeling. There's a few hours of content there that you can pull up.
Just a couple hundred hours, you know.
So what is a changeling? Let's move a little bit away from the sort of the meta plot of the game and moving into what a character is. When you're creating a changeling, you are in fact you kind of have to create not only who you are as a mortal, but also who you are as a changeling at the same time, because the two are one and the same. You will have a mortal life and you will have a changeling life, and if you don't spend enough time in both, you're in trouble, as I mentioned before. Now, in Disconcordia, we're not going to be doing a whole lot of looking at your mortal life. It's more about when you're interacting with other changelings. When you're not in the chat, it's kind of assumed that your character is taking care of their real life, their real business. So there is that to put in as well. So if you have a look, you know what, we're going to take a quick glance at what the character sheet looks like, so that people can get
shiny.
Yeah, so not your character sheet, not just yet. But we will take a look at what the character sheet looks like so that we can kind of go over the different elements of what makes up a changeling so that people can learn a little bit about making their characters. So here we are. Your name, I mean, standard thing, although changelings sometimes adopt a separate name for their changeling persona than for their real life persona to keep those two more separate. Some don't, so that's something that people can consider. Every changeling is a member of a court, and the courts here, depending on mythology, are they mean different things, but in changeling, your court is more of your philosophical outlook. Whether you believe in things like honor above all and beauty is life and never forget a debt, that would make you Seelie. Whereas the Unseelie are more along the lines of things like passion before duty, glamour is free, change is good. The philosophies differ, and changelings fall into a court one way or the other depending on where they fall, and some changelings swap back and forth. It can be quite dramatic.
A lot of people fall into a trap here of attaching Seelie and Unseelie to good and evil or selfless and selfish, when you can be either of those on either side of the line. You can be a really, really evil Seelie character quite easily. So don't try not to draw those connections.
Absolutely. Unseelie does not mean evil. Seelie does not mean good. As an example, in Changeling the Streaming, 2 of the characters were Seelie and 1 was Unseelie. They can get along just fine. It's just a different philosophy, a different philosophical outlook on things. You know, back in the day, before politics made it so that if you were a member of a different political party, you could still be friends with them, as opposed to now where, you know, you can't. I just got political here for a second. Oh dear.
I don't know Canadian parties.
Canadian, it's actually a lot less so in Canada.
Okay.
Our parties, for one thing, we have more than 2 political parties that are viable, and we also we don't fall as heavily on extremes. We're not as far left or as far right. A lot of Canadian parties are quite centrist. At any rate,
so I'll hold up the pitchforks.
Yeah. Your characters will also have legacies. Legacies are kind of like role-playing hints. They're elements of your personality. The one that matches your court is the more dominant one, and the one that does not match your court is still a part of you, but it affects you more subconsciously. So your legacies are things like bumpkin, courtier, crafter, dandy. In the book, you'll see descriptions of what each of these mean, to sort of inform how you play. So a paladin might be somebody who is all about trying to protect those around who may not be able to protect themselves, whereas a sage is somebody who's who values wisdom and passing it on to others quite a bit. Whereas your unseelie legacy, Peacock might be somebody who wants to bring their own fantastic nature out to everyone else, and Riddler might be the kind of person who tries to make people learn by challenging them. So they're not necessarily like a strict, this is how you must play your character, more of kind of a way to encourage you, but also your legacies can inform how you regain willpower.
Yeah, the wording of the bans on these is a lot stricter than it actually is. Like, the ban says never do this, but you don't get punished if you do that thing.
No, and changelings also don't refer to their own legacies. Like, they don't say, hi, my name's Jack and I'm a dandy wretch. They don't know those sorts of things. They're archetypes. They're meant as character archetypes, but you're right. What is listed as a ban, such as for Riddler being like, never tell the whole unvarnished truth or whatever. That's just more like, this is something that I might want to avoid doing depending on how heavily I'm leaning into my legacy. Because you also, maybe your legacies are sort of muted and you don't they don't play a huge role in your life. And some people might be really hard and lean into that legacy, or even both legacies. So it's more of a guideline as opposed to a strict rule. Legacies are not diegetic. Yes, Kung Fu Fenders, if we want to get into design terms. You'll also notice up here that there's seeming, Childling, Wilder, and Grump. Now, in earlier editions, this meant something way different. It involved what your mortal age was, and it really, really made the game difficult in a lot of ways.
It really did.
They've changed that. Thank goodness. So what are seemings?
Seemings seem to be where your own position and worldview happen to be at the moment. It's not necessarily a maturity, but like it can be. I've always viewed, Wilder as the adventurer and Grump as the adventurer that's settled down, but there's no reason why a Grump can't go on an adventure.
Right. It's more akin to your outlook on life in the world. A childling looks at the world with like childlike wonder and glee and is constantly like learning and poking around and exploring. A wilder is somebody who's ready to, take the reins of their life and go forward and have fun, go on adventures, make waves, shake things up. And grumps are changelings who have, like you said, like they've had their adventures, they've had their wonder, and now it's time for them to settle down, dispense their wisdom. It does not mean that they can't go counter to all these things, and you also can shift seemings. You can go from childling to wilder to grump, but then a grump might also become so inspired by all the adventures that he's going on that he goes straight back to wilder. Or a childling might have such an experience that that she goes from being a childling right to a grump instead of heading to wilder. It is kind of there are some mechanics that kind of rely on your seeming, but it's really also just sort of a way to see what stage is your character in their journey.
A childling that goes from the entire world is full of wonder to I like my box right here.
Yeah. Yeah. I would venture to say that most characters created as PCs end up being wilders, but that's not necessarily the case. There's nothing that prevents you from choosing one of the three, especially in a social heavy game like this. We may see some more of the other kinds because there will be fewer adventures to go on and a lot more sitting around and talking and having conversations and intrigue among people. But there's a little less of a focus on adventuring in this game. So wilders may be a little less popular choice, but also, honestly, pick what you want. It's all there in the book. A really important choice that you have to make, though, is your kith. And that's kind of what kind of changeling you are. What kind of changeling are you, Pook?
As much as I love Puka, me personally, I think I probably line up with Troll a little bit better, to be honest.
How much does this book cost, and do I need supplements? You know what? We're going to answer that right away, because that is a really good question.
That's an amazing question.
You can buy the PDF of this book on DriveThruRPG. I believe the cost is $25 US. And you get a PDF which is huge and has everything you need to play.
It's 500 pages.
Yeah, there are supplements that exist. You can go back and buy second edition supplements. There are a few 20th anniversary supplements, notably the Player's Guide, the Book of Freeholds, and Kithbook Boggin. You do not need any of those, and I guarantee you don't need those. It's really not important for you to pick that up. The 20th anniversary book is all you need. And the Player's Guide has some really cool stuff in it. You don't need it. I guarantee you do not need it to play. And of those 500 pages, honestly, you can start playing after reading maybe 30 of them. Oh, let's get this featured chat up.
Changeling is a game, especially with 20 being like, it's a collection book. So there's a ton of options in that Changeling 20th core book. And this game is using just a fragment of it. Don't be intimidated by the 500 pages. But if you fall for Changeling, you'll have plenty of options in that book. Oh my gosh.
You know what? Here, I'm going to go get the book. I will show you. Why is the book not here? Where'd it go?
I took it. I took the book.
Oh, crud. Maybe... Oh, you know what? Maybe somebody else has the book. That's fine. Not a problem.
Oh no! The book
I have
the
a
book
feeling
is lost.
like somebody who lives with me may have the book in her possession.
Somebody's been doing a lot of work. Kate, seriously,
yes,
much work.
Kate's been doing a lot of work. We're not gonna bother her for the book right now. You do not have it in your room. Oh, crap. The book's missing. Where did it go? Yeah. I did.
The book is a wilder.
The book must be. Where the hell did it go? Yeah, Pisky must have come by and stolen it. Yeah, at any rate, the book contains like a lot of setting information, but the book also contains rules that you won't need to worry about. There's a storyteller section. There's a section about like, here's what changelings are like all around the world, and you absolutely don't have to read all of those things. It isn't something that you're going to have to worry about. But anyway, we'll come back to this. That is what you need to do. You need to get a hold of the PDF. That's all you need. You can buy a physical copy of the book. It's a nice book. It's got great illustrations in it. Tony DiTerlizzi, Rebecca Guai, these are people who have been involved in Changeling from the very beginning. But that is literally the only thing that you would need to pick up. And you can secure that PDF legally through DriveThruRPG, no problem. How involved will the game be? How often should players be checking into the Discord? The game is as involved as you want it to be. Because the game is kind of revolved around a freehold, which is a gathering place where changelings, it's like a social gathering place. It's a place of power for changelings and all that. You can be the sort of person who shows up every day and spends hours there, greeting people, talking to people, playing around. That would be fine. You could be the kind of person who shows up once a week, once a month even, and that's also fine. There's no directive as to how much you want to how much you have to play. It's how much you want to play. If you want to get involved in heavier things like in the future there may be adventures that pop up, or there may be more kind of involved storylines, then you can choose to play more often. but there's nothing that forces you to do so or not. I will point out that you will only gain experience when you are actively playing. So if you don't log into the Discord server in a day, then you won't get XP for that day. Whereas if you do log into the Discord server, you will get XP. But I wouldn't worry too much about characters getting too overpowered versus others. You don't have to play for very long to get your XP in a day, so that's not an issue. Still nothing, huh? Wow, that book just up and fled. Oh, it's because I was looking for it in the wrong place. Thank you. So I actually have the premium edition because I loved this game so much as a kid that I invested in it when it got kickstarted. So I have like the super nice version, but you can see it's in full color. It's got lovely art in it, just wonderful. And while it is a large book, the stuff that you will have to read, if there's fiction in it, which you won't have to read, but you know, that much of the book will probably be enough for most players to read. Because also, if you're not hard into the mechanics, that's okay too. Because if you want to be the kind of person who sits down and mostly just chats with other people, go for it. That's all you kind of need to do. And you can sort of decide if the game is for you at that point. And then if you do, then you can start learning the mechanics. So, and if there's a problem, you can just unleash. That's all you need to do.
Right.
Like, just go nuts. So that's not something that you're going to have to worry about too much. Is, do I have to know the game perfectly? Absolutely not. Storytellers will be there to help. Players will be there to help you too. I guarantee you that a lot of the people who play this game love it so much that they'll be happy to help other people learn how to play. Only thing,
join us.
Yes. The only thing that we have to ask is that you make some effort to learn on your own. We can't take this book and download all the information to you one by one. That would just be way too much for anybody to take on. So, you come from Exalted. How complicated would you say it is in comparison? Half as complicated as Exalted. Still definitely a game that has mechanics in it and it is involved, but it isn't nearly as involved as Exalted is. Exalted is very crunch heavy. Changeling is got a fair amount of crunch, but not to the degree of Exalted. A comparable amount of crunch, you might even say, to Exalted Essence, although it's a mature game. It's been out for over 20 years, so its rules are a lot more... it's like edited properly. Exalted Essence, just bear in mind, that manuscript has a lot of promise, but it is not complete, and it is not edited. This is a fully released thing, so...
Exalted is Chunky Monkey, Changeling is more cookie dough. Yeah, I think that's actually
a good way to put it. Kung Fu Fenders, currently the XP curve that we are planning on is half an experience per day of play. Is what we're going for right now. We may alter that or change that in the future. We also will have elements in place to make sure that if a player has capped out on experience, we will have experience caps. Then at a certain point, we will start encouraging people to make new characters. I am not that interested in having somebody... Look, this is also a problem that's going to happen way in the future, right? Like, we're not even sure if this is going to work past a few months. We're hoping it will. But if we're not going to get into the situation where you can join the game, but you're surrounded by people who've been playing for 5 years, who have basically poured an ink well all over their sheet. Every dot is filled in, and there's no reason for you to do anything because they can just do anything by sitting and thinking of what they want to have done, and it happens automatically. Characters will be retired before then. And we do have plans to allow people to get bonuses if they cap out on experience and then make a new character by retiring their old one. Things like options at character creation that aren't available to first-time characters. If your character dies in the service of a story, if your character leaves the game for a reason that furthers the story of the campaign, then it becomes more likely that in your next character, we might be able to make things a little more special for you. You might be able to choose some things that you wouldn't normally be able to choose. First-time characters, Kung Fu Fenris, basically, New Game Plus weirdness, kind of. For first-time characters, most character options are available, but for instance, no merits and flaws are available for first-time characters. They're all restricted. If you want to play a changeling who isn't one of the base 13 kith, those are restricted and you can't pick those. If you want to play something that isn't a changeling, you can't pick those. Except for an enchanted mortal, we will let you play one of those. But there are things that, but we definitely don't want to make things too crazy right at the start. But we can't let too many options be open at once, especially because a lot of merits and flaws are very particular, and they warp the game in a way that we can't necessarily afford to do in a mass game, right? Like if you have enemy 5 as a flaw going in, that changes it for not like you and your table, but for everybody. It also demands personalized storyteller attention, which we can't always guarantee. So we're not Requiem. I'm telling you this right now. First and foremost, you will not be allowed to sit on a capped out character forever. You play knowing that eventually your character is going to have to move on. Not necessarily die. We're not going to it's not Carousel. It's not Logan's Run, but we're not going to let people basically make the game unfun for everybody by forcing them to deal with all these massive characters. Oh, I'm saying this because in a previous chat that I was the head storyteller of, when I suggested that we reset the venue because there were too many sharks, everyone said no, so I quit. And then the venue fell apart because it turns out people don't like joining games where there are too many sharks. And then without people joining the game eventually died.
Fell apart. Yeah. As Loracular just said in chat, we definitely ran into the issue of the games lasted longer than a year and some of these characters were making 3 XP per week, and there's not a lot of places for XP to go on a World of Darkness character sheet.
Mm-hmm.
Especially at that rate.
Yeah.
And so you have to find other alternatives for it. Something that we had to do that players really didn't like was we had to run yearly censuses and basically say, okay, submit to us what you have, so we can see where things are. And we would go through it all and be like, okay, this is the new baseline for this game. Sorry if it affects you in any way, but if you want to hang on to the character, but you can't hang on to all the power.
Right.
It was unfortunate because some people just didn't want to let go of the character despite the fact that they were. It's you gotta let the B team. You have to let the B team come up and have their adventures too.
Yeah.
You can't just sit around and be Professor Xavier all day.
Absolutely. And so we are going to deal with that. We haven't yet set exactly how much XP people are going to earn per day. Remember that the crew in Changeling the Streaming were earning 3 experience a week, thereabouts, sometimes getting an extra 1 or 2 here and there for play of the game or whatever. And we kept that game going for a while. We ended up with 136 sessions, but by the end they were extremely powerful. And we don't want people to get to that point and then basically sit on the game. That won't happen. The Crosshair asks, will we have the usual until session 3 you can change your character type of thing? To a slightly more limited extent. You absolutely will be able to contact a storyteller and say, this doesn't work the way that I thought it does. I'd love to change it. Or I realize now that this doesn't quite fit my character, and that's fine. but there are certain things that we can't just change. For instance, you won't be able to say, oh, I thought I wanted to be a troll, but now I want to be a Slua instead. It would be too confusing in a mass game where you have many, like dozens of other players, to then all of a sudden be like, weren't you a Slua before? And you're like, no, now I'm a troll. At that point, if enough changes are required, we may just ask you to make a new character. But absolutely, if there's things like, oh, after playing for like a week, I've noticed I really should have 4 dots in intelligence and 3 in perception instead of 4 in perception and 3 in intelligence. Yeah, that's a change that we'll make for you. That's not a problem. But yeah, if your character change is large enough, we may just be like, you have to come up with a new character. In which case you'll need to make a new name and all of that. Also, you will only be allowed to have one character at a time. In Discord, it's essentially in Discord you have one account. It's very difficult to play to use Discord with more than one account at a time. It's possible, but it's very finicky, and so you can have one character. And once that character, if you wish to play a different character, then you will have to stop playing your first character in order to do so. For storytellers, we'll probably just operate under our own nicknames, and then we'll have to label our NPCs as they come in. Because your nickname on the server will end up being your character name. For what it's worth. We'll go back to the sheet here for a little bit. Soon we'll probably just end up sanctioning you soon, Pook, because then people will get an idea of what's involved in character creation in doing so.
Right.
Your motley, that's the kind of group of changelings who you hang out with. That's a pure in-game kind of thing. There aren't really mechanics revolving around that. Kith, by the way, these are the Kith that are available to you at character creation. There are great one-page sort of summaries of each of these Kith available in the book, but this is probably one of the biggest decisions you'll make at character creation is what Kith you are. A lot of changeling personality in society revolves around that. House. Changelings operate under a weird sort of neo-feudal system. Remember, the world around them still exists. So there are things like democracies and republics and dictatorships and monarchies and communism and all that. But for changelings, they do exist in when I say a neo-feudalistic society, it's because you can choose to sort of reject it to a certain degree, but reject it and then you no longer get help from other changelings if you need the help. So there are nobles and there are commoners. If you are a noble, you'll be a member of a house, and here are the houses that you have available to you. I would venture to guess that most player characters may end up not playing a noble and they will play a commoner, especially because the main freehold that people are going to be playing in is a commoner freehold. It is not a noble freehold. That's not to say nobles can't go in, but your title means a lot less in a commoner freehold than outside it. You sort of lose a lot of the privileges of status when you are in a commoner freehold. It's not like you lose them entirely. You know, if you disrespect a knight, that's probably a bad thing if then once you leave the freehold, that knight now has more power over you. But it makes it a little less kind of important. And as Kung Fu Fenris said, there is also a parliament, so there is a certain amount of democracy that goes on as well. Would you be a member of a house, Pook?
I love House Liam. I love Liam and Dougal. They just adore them as houses. I guess if I had to pick a house, I'd probably be either Liam or Fiona. I know I picked all Sealy houses. Kung Fu's gonna bring that up in a second here.
I will say that also in our game, there will be no custom houses, at least not at the start. this is also partially so that there's a shared universe that people can share into, right? Like people can read the book and find out about these houses. If we introduce too many custom things, it'll be difficult for people to get a handle on what's going on. Yeah, like banner houses from the player guide. Banner houses will not be available at character creation at the start.
It's funny that I mentioned earlier that Seelie and Unseelie are not good and evil, but like the Unseelie houses are very mustache twirly.
A lot of them are, yes. But you can be Unseelie in a Seelie house.
Yes.
That is a possibility. And you can be Seelie in an Unseelie house, although that's rare. So that is a possibility. But yeah, the Unseelie houses tend to be a little more manipulative. I think that's a throwback from like earlier editions of the game, but at any rate, Scraps Kingdom of Metal. So here's the thing though. There are kingdoms around the world. Concordia is just North America, essentially. There's Hibernia, which is over in Europe. There's plenty of other places to come from, but the game is set in Concordia. It's set in Montreal, Quebec, and it is not. It is also a game that will take place in English. We kind of have to say that because despite of course that Montreal is actually more of a French-speaking city than an English-speaking city. But the game will take place in English. Some of that is for safety reasons, so that everybody can understand each other. And also because it gives all the players a common language to be able to play together. Your character can, of course, speak other languages. That's okay. But speaking of the Freehold, how much will locations across Montreal play into things? Asks Mystic Sage. So while every Freehold in Montreal that we have are based on real world locations, and you can point them out on a map, you do not need to have knowledge of the city of Montreal to play. You might be curious, you might look into it, you might find out more about our island metropolis that we have going on around here, but you do not need to know about Montreal. You can just walk into the Freehold and be like, okay, well, here I am in the Freehold and I'm new to the city and I don't care about the rest of it. And that would be totally fine. But you can come in and talk about the Metro and talk about the Jazz Festival coming up and talk about the various tourist destinations that people can have. You can talk about the hockey team that's practically religion around here. All of those things are possible, but you do not have to, and it will not be a requisite part of the game. We set it in Montreal so that people can interact with that if they so choose. But most of the game will be taking place inside the Freehold of Starcloth, which is the new Freehold that's popping up. So, will the server only handle things happening in the Freehold? No. You will have the ability to travel to other Freeholds. You'll have the ability to also do things that are not directly inside the Freehold. Some of these may be custom rooms that you come up with, right? If you want to... Pardon me. Pook, that was especially rude. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I saw a player who had interest in like running a bookstore.
So yeah, maybe we'll create a room for your bookstore and people can go in and interact in that bookstore. Maybe there will be a room that's just the park that's across the street from the Freehold and people can do that. That's totally fine. The reason why we are focusing around a Freehold though is because at any given time, it's more fun to play when there are other players to play with. And it's less fun if you have 10 locations and you have one changeling in each of those locations. Because then nobody's talking to each other, and that's not what we're going for. So while we may open private rooms for other people, the idea is that it's not the focus. People can go there, that's great, but they don't necessarily have to go there in order to experience play. The other Freeholds as well, because they are more storyteller driven, because most of the people in those Freeholds will be NPCs, and as another thing, most of those NPCs are played by me. Those will be rarer. And while you may be able to go in and have a look, it's also very possible that we might say, sorry, the Freehold's closed right now, you can't go in. There is going to be a certain amount of hand waving that players will have to accept, right? For instance, if you own a bookstore, but you can only play when in Montreal a bookstore would normally be open, that's fine. You don't have to come up with a reason why you happen to be in this freehold. You can just be like, yep, my bookstore's running okay. There's somebody there who's minding it right now and I can go back. Or you can never give an explanation at all. We're not going to penalize you for owning a bookstore, but only being able to play at a time when the bookstore would be open. Like that's not going to be a problem for us. We'd rather you play. The Loracular and Methodiel, I appreciate it. We fought hard. Do you prefer characters have actual places like schools, businesses in their background when they're tied to one, or a fictional one like that bookstore? I don't care. It can be either one, or it can be vague. You can say, I'm a university student, and I'm not going to need you to declare what university you're attending. You can if you choose, but I'm not interested in that because I'm not going to be delving so deeply into your characters' backgrounds, nor will the other storytellers, that it's going to be really important whether you're attending McGill or Concordia or UCAM or any of the other universities that are present here, of which we have quite a few. If you have a business, you can mention, oh yeah, my business is located in this borough, if you want to. You don't have to, and we're not going to penalize you either way. If your business starts being a place where a lot of people gather, we may work with you to come up with that if it becomes important, but I don't see it being that much of a big deal. Sorry, Pook, I realize I'm answering a lot of questions here and asking you to wait, but
no, I'm this is very productive and I'm really enjoying this, so you're definitely not putting me off.
Crosshair asks, can you have a bookstore that's a Fey bookstore that doesn't deal in mortals and is open yet not visibly open during when you happen to be up? Yes, you absolutely can. A Fey bookstore may look to a human like an abandoned store that's locked and that they can't get in, whereas other Fey will see it as a cozy, warm bookstore, or maybe it's a dank, drafty bookstore. I don't know. Depends on what your changeling's into. But yes, there are ways for you to have Fey-only interactions. Now, I will point out that if we were playing this game super strict, which we're not, if you only ever catered to other Fae and you had no real job or real attachments, you would start sliding into Bedlam, which is what happens when changelings don't interact with the mortal world enough. We're probably not going to get to that point, because the assumption is going to be that you do have a mortal life outside. But yeah, if you want a Fae-only bookstore, go nuts. That'd be great. No problems there. Requiem asks, in most roleplay chats, time is kind of vague anyways. Can't tell often I would be in one chat and it's the middle of the night while another is roleplaying in the middle of the day. So if we're going technically, the time in the chat will be in Eastern time. So whatever time it is in Montreal, that's the time it is in game. But it is very vague because also some scenes will take a long time to play out, but won't necessarily take as long in game, right? Like typing a conversation is slower than speaking a conversation. So time is a little bit vague, like Requiem said. It's wibbly wobbly, but it's also, if nobody is playing and somebody enters the chat and says they start doing something, the assumption is that they are starting to do it at the actual time it is in Montreal. If you show up and it's 3 a.m. in Montreal, it's 3 a.m. in the Freehold, but that's okay. Plenty of changelings have different day-night cycles, right? Waking, sleeping cycles. That's not a problem. And we're definitely not going to be like, wow, you're weird. You only show up between 2 and 5 a.m. If that's when you can play, as long as there are other players to play with you, fantastic. We're good.
Yeah, and I'm not John on this one, so John could probably give a little bit more background here, but if these channels are going to be locations and someone is already playing in that location and then you kick up something, be a little bit mindful of like what they've established is going on there already, like, because you'd be assumed to be in the same location as them.
That's right.
So but other than that, everything else is kind of wibbly wobbly.
Yeah. If you're in like a common room in the Freehold where a lot of people are gathering, and you say that you're setting up decorations in the common room because you're going to celebrate somebody's birthday, and somebody else comes in, they're in the room where there are decorations being set up. That's great. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you also have to be setting up decorations, or that you have to be engaged in that birthday if you don't want to. At the same time, if you're like, I walk into this room and I open my hand and I have a grenade and I've pulled the pin, well, first off, we'll see, right? Like, you can't just walk in and blow up the freehold without actually having a storyteller figure that out. But you can't ignore what's happening in the room if you are also in the room, given if it's important enough. So that's a thing. Yeah, read the room is a great way of putting it, Osab. Absolutely. And Avatar of Cain, should you wait to ask questions after Pook gets sanctioned? Nope. Just ask questions right away. I am currently marking down these questions, and I will get to them when I can. So if I can't answer right away, I will answer later on. But yeah, let's get to sanctioning a character, I think, because then we'll have time afterwards to answer questions. So you'll get an idea of what will be involved when it's time for you to... yeah, it is the spiritual successor to Furnost. Weirdness gets me. Weirdness absolutely gets me. So let's have a look. Let's have a look at what it's going to be like to sanction a character, because I think that people will learn a bit about that. And it's also a way for us to go over some of these topics as well. I imagine we're going to have more Q&As about this game later on. We're not going to get to all of them this clinic hours, so you can always ask them in the Discord, and you can always ask them in another clinic hours, because we'll probably devote the next few to this as well. Let's just make sure that I've got everything set up the way that I need them to be. Fairly Gay says, I really appreciate having a semi-set time situation. I've had many situations where a scene was set up at like the lunch rush in that area, and then someone came in and went, oh no, it's 11 p.m. now, your scene is over, because they didn't want to take part in a lunch scene. Well, first of all, you can't tell somebody that their scene is over. There are some people can say that. They're storytellers, and trust me, no storyteller in the server is going to be a dick. So that's not going to happen. If your scene is still going, your scene is still going. At worst, we may create a separate room to shift a scene into if necessary, but we're not going to end a scene just because we don't feel like having it go on anymore. That's not what we're doing. We might end a scene if we're like, this is crossing one of our server's lines and veils, or this scene is antithetical to the style of play that we're looking at, because all of you are sitting around just sharing alt-right memes. In which case, then, yeah, we might shut that down. But otherwise, no. We'll shut things down mostly for reasons of safety more than anything else.
Yeah, this is actually, as Kung Fu Fenris brought up, a great place to try out Discord's new threading feature.
Yep. We'll see also. Look, we're also trying this out. There's a reason that when we launch, we're calling it a beta, because we don't know. Some things may work the way that we love, and some we might need to change. So we'll see what works, but threads might be very good for that sort of thing. I'd rather people not use threads in general just by talking to somebody else, because one of the things that's cool about being in a chat is that if there are conversations going, you can actually see what other conversations are happening, because your character might overhear what's going on.
Yeah.
But a thread might be really useful if you have a very quick whispered conversation with somebody else, or if you're like, okay, this section of the room is at a separate area right now, like we've partitioned it off, so we'll take it to a separate kind of thread. That might be a really good use for it. We'll definitely keep an eye on it as we go. I'll also point out right away, if you're looking to play in Disconcordia, we would absolutely love to have you. And we're feel free to tell your friends, like bring people in. We're not doing huge public posts on like Reddit or anything just yet, because we think it'll be more manageable to do word of mouth for now. But we have safety tools. The safety tools that you've seen us play with on Sundays are in place. They are automated by the bot. We have emoji that people can use. They will notify storytellers if things go bad. Every player is going to have a profile where you can put in things like your lines and veils. Safety is going to be a huge priority for us in this game. Of course, we cannot accommodate all safety things. For instance, if you have a line that is completely incompatible with the game, a storyteller may work with you, but we may also tell you that it might not be the game for you, right? We can't change the entire game to suit one player all the time. But where it's possible, and believe me, most of the time it's possible, we'll be able to accommodate individual player needs. When you're sanctioning a character, one of the first things that we're going to go over are your lines and veils. Because if, for instance, and we're going to do this now as if I'm sanctioning Pook, this would be done over text, not over voice, but we'll do it on voice just because we're here.
Okay.
But the first thing that I would ask you, Pook, is do you have any lines or veils that we should know about?
I'm double checking to see which ones are already in place. I'm actually scrolling the player's guide right now.
So I will tell you right now, the lines and veils that the server has in place, which everyone must abide by, our lines are sexual violence, intimate partner violence or abuse, and police aggression, although that only applies to mortal police. Our veils include hate speech. So if you want to say horrible things, you'll have to allude to said horrible things. Note that I don't mean vulgarity. I mean hate speech or hate terms, but that doesn't include hate terms that are specific to supernaturals, right? Like if you want to call a vampire a lick, that's okay. We're not gonna bother you. But if you want to use a racial slur, if that's the kind of thing that you want to do, you're going to have to be vague about it. And I'll also point out that it's very possible that if you're basing a character around being a huge racist and that's all they ever talk about, we might nix that character concept anyway. Pornography is a veil. This game will involve relationships, I imagine, and part of relationships is sex. We don't want pornographic depictions. So if you are starting to talk about how your character and another character are heating it up, you may have to fade to black because we just don't want things explicit. We acknowledge the existence of sex. There will be discussions of sex. That's fine. But if you're talking about how you're specifically inserting tab A into slot B, that's not. That includes private channels, by the way, because storytellers will be able to see all private channels, and that's not necessarily something that we want to see. If you want to have cyber sex with another player, that's great, not on our server. We don't mind depictions of nudity or lewdness, perhaps. Like if you draw your character and you want to post a drawing of your character and your character is depicted nude, that's fine. We have fan art, lovely fan art of Changeling the Streaming, which involve our characters in intimate situations, and all of them are fine. We don't mind those being on the server. That's actually a good kind of line for you to look at. But there's nothing that is overly pornographic. And unfortunately, what's pornographic is up to storyteller discretion. We'll have to let you know. We're not interested in trying to come up with a huge kind of line or whatever to show that. So, and excessive gore. Excessive gore is a veil for us. You can say that you've come in and you're bleeding from the arm. That's fine. But if you start describing every individual globule of like liquidized fat dripping from your wounds, well, it's probably not okay. So again, what's excessive will be determined by storytellers. And also, if a player throws up a pause card and says like, hey, so, totally cool to keep playing, but if we could tone it down on the descriptions, then that is a reasonable accommodation that I think most players can get behind.
I think I only have one addition as far as like a personal, and it's a veil. And that would be intentional harm to children.
So intentional harm to children is something that we can absolutely sort of look at as a line that we can keep into account. We don't have a place for lines and veils, I think, on the sheet itself, but we do have places where we can list it, and you'll be putting it in your profile, which is part of the Discord bot, which we don't have there. So that is something that I think we'd be able to accommodate. Is it a hard line? Like in your game, you want no children to ever experience harm, or is it more of a veil?
It's definitely a veil. It's I don't have issues with the concept of, okay, this is going to sound let me phrase this properly.
Right.
In fiction, I do not have issues with the concept of child abuse existing. I do not want to see depictions of details.
So that's absolutely fine. That is a line that I'm very happy, or a veil that I'm very happy to accommodate, and I don't think it'll be a problem in this game. And it's also more of you'll never encounter a situation where you'll be like, now you have to watch a child suffering unduly at the hands of someone else. We're not going to be getting into that. You might meet somebody who's like, that guy's a jerk to kids, and then you can, kick his ass or whatever.
Yeah.
But we're not going deep into that. So I'm glad that people are appreciating the veils that we have in place for the server. Some of that is just, it's what we got to do, because we also don't want to get shut down. But also, look, I love exploring things like sexuality in role-playing, but I don't enjoy exploring the act of coitus in role-playing, typically. I mean, I'm sure that there must be arenas in which that's fantastic and that's great. But in much the same way, I appreciate role-playing violence. I don't appreciate it when that violence is designed to make people overly uncomfortable. So, yeah, and childling no longer literally means a child in C20. So that's a thing. Yeah, childlings can be of any age. I will also point out, sensuality, not porn. So sensuality, totally fine. Porn, there are other places for porn. I'm not going to shame you for it, but you can find it somewhere else. I'll also point out that all PCs must be over the age of 18. This is actually something that's out of our hands. It's the law. Because there may be depictions of things like sex and the like in this game, we can't risk that somebody could shut us down for something like child abuse or child pornography. Rules in Canada are quite strict about how sex can be depicted. We don't feel like we want to start policing everybody. Because look, it's fantastic. If you're a 15-year-old and you're with another 15-year-old, that's legal in Canada. We have Romeo and Juliet laws here. The age of consent here is technically 16. There are exceptions for couples that are close in age earlier. But we just don't want to get involved in that. It's very messy. Luke, you know what? That's a great question about sharing it with another Discord community. Could you ask that question on Discord? Because I think that's something we're gonna have to talk about and get back to you on. Because I definitely want to get back to you on it, and but I can't snap decision that question just yet, Luke. I apologize. Lord of the Rings, not Game of Thrones. No, there can be Game of Thrones elements in there, but we're also, Game of Thrones skirted the line towards pornography occasionally, and we'd probably stay a little bit further away from that. But I'm also not going to explode if you describe your character walking in wearing a towel wrapped around their waist. That's not going to be an issue. Or even if your character walks into a room naked, I'm not going to have a problem with it. Anyway, so your lines and veils are compatible with the game. So great, Pook, fantastic. We can move on to sanctioning your character at this point. One thing that we are adding to the sheet that Pook didn't have is a one-line character concept. Pook did not fill this out because it was not part of the sheet when he was working on it. So do you have like a one phrase, like 2 or 3 words, even if something concept line for your character, such as like a bad character concept would be edgy loner assassin.
Let's put edgy loner assassin there.
Right, great.
No, sorry. It's really hard to kind of boil this down to. This is actually the hardest part of the sheet for me.
Totally.
How do you elevator pitch a character?
So I see that you're a university student. I see that you are, you're a changeling coming in. You forgot orphan, Osab. You know things. You definitely know things. The reason why I'm asking is because I want to make sure that your sheet matches this character concept.
I'm gonna, you know what? I'm gonna put him at affable secret keeper.
That's a great concept. I'm surprised that you came out with that on the spot. That's a fantastic concept. That is great. Luke, absolutely bring it up with us on Discord. We just want to make sure that we've had that conversation before we say yes or no, and invite friends. The thing that we're more worried about is, do we want to start posting in communities where it might like spread out and then all of a sudden we have 400 people trying to join, which if that's what it comes to at some point, maybe that'd be great. But when we're just launching in beta, we want to make sure that we have a manageable number of players to start. So we just got to talk about it. I imagine the answer is probably going to be yes, but we'll see. Okay, so Affable Secret Keeper. So that's great. What we're going to do is we're going to have a look at your sheet. We're going to see whether the dots line up, and we're going to have a look and see if there's any flags. So this is kind of also giving you an impression of what I do when I go through and sanctioning a sheet. When you're creating a character, we're going to give you a copy of this character sheet, and you'll fill it out. It's easy to fill out. You can just click on these and you select the value and it fills it out for you. Kate's been doing a wonderful job on this sheet. But you have to fill out the sheet yourself. And when it is complete, then you come to a storyteller. Why? Because there's a lot more players and there aren't that many storytellers, and we need to kind of have you help us expedite the process. So if I look at your attributes, I see that you have spent bonus points. You spent 5 bonus points to increase your perception to 3. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
All right. So I'm going to put for perception. Great. In talents, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There are 10. 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So you've spent 2 freebies on a skill.
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You spent 4 freebies on knowledges.
Yes.
And 5 in backgrounds, 3 in arts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You spent
2 realms.
You spent 4 in realms.
Yeah.
Which means that the total number that you have spent is 15, which is the correct number of freebie points. Congratulations.
I want a prize!
This is one of the things that we check first and foremost, because I want you to spend all of your freebie points. So we make sure that
I was going to ask if there was like a way to denote which abilities you spent freebies on, like if you wanted color coding for that as well.
I mean, you could put them in the notes here if you wanted to.
Okay.
But we're also able to check that. That's not a huge ask. The next thing that I'm going to look at on a character sheet is I'm going to check to see if there's anything that really strikes me as quite powerful. Powerful would mean something that has 4 or more dots in it. And the reason why is not because powerful is something we want to discourage, but powerful should have a point. Your character, who you've got as Alex Cole here, is that the mortal name or the changeling name?
That's the mortal name.
And what would the changeling name be?
Nathan Fletcher. I put it on the back page, but I probably should put it here because it's going to be the main alias he goes by.
Yeah, so let's call him Nathan because his mortal name is back here. So let's call him Nathan here. Nathan is an affable secret keeper, which is great. But it would be strange if Nathan's character concept was like humble bookkeeper. And then I looked and I was like, wow, you have firearms 5. That's not even necessarily a no, but I want to know why. Why is your character one of the greatest gunslingers in the world, and yet is a humble bookkeeper? So what I'm looking for is the areas in which Nathan is powerful, and then just probing a little bit to find out why. Dexterity and stamina are high. Those are not things that I have to worry about because quite literally, you can't actually escape having at least 1 4 in your attributes.
That was I dislike that because I didn't see a reason to give him strength 3.
But changelings are also superhuman to a certain extent. 2 dots is human average. 1 dot is less than human average. 5 dots is peak of human ability. It is rare but possible for a character to have more than 5 dots in something, but that's only possible in Changeling if your kith gives you a bonus. Otherwise, you are maxed out at 5. You are, after all, housed in a human body. But the only things that I see here are Dexterity 4 and Stamina 4. We have, I see here in the back, where was it? Oh, you might have put it in the notes.
I actually no.
Yeah,
It's in the notes for if you go to the
where
if you hover over dexterity.
Yeah, so it's here.
See.
So you have a specialty of swift and dexterity and tireless and stamina. That's great. You've got those there. Don't have to worry about that. So we're good on that score. So I don't see anything up in the attributes that would lead me to start probing, and it's pretty obvious also from looking at this sheet that there's no min-maxing involved. Again, min-maxing isn't necessarily going to get you a no. It's more likely for me to start probing and asking why something is the way that it is. If I look at your abilities, I also see that in general, you're more of a jack of all trades kind of person as opposed to somebody who specializes. The only 3 that you have is an alertness, and everything else is at 2 or 1. Unlike attributes and abilities, humans start with 0. And if you train a little bit in it, you might have 1 dot. 5 dots is considered to be world expert. No one knows more about this than you. So 3, at a 3, or sorry, even at a 2, if you have an ability at a 2, you can make a living doing it. 3 would imply that you're, quite good at it. 4 probably implies that you're at like a doctorate level at that skill. And then 5 is world class. So,
and the alertness focus here is actually because other versions of this character in my head have had the acute sense merit, which is not allowed.
That's right. Right now, acute sense is not allowed. So instead, you have to kind of boost up alertness instead. So that makes sense. But right now, I'm looking at this and I'm getting the impression that you're still kind of Nathan is still finding out who he is or moving into a focus. Is that kind of fair to say?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So then that's fine for me. If I'm sanctioning a character, that means no problem. The character also, I can point out at this point, hey, so being a jack of all trades is good. However, it can also be fun to have something that you're quite good at in order to make sure that there's times where you can shine. I'm not going to insist on this right now. You do have the ability to shine in a few areas here, but it might be worth thinking as you're progressing your character that maybe you want to start thinking of areas in which you might want to focus a little more. But otherwise, not something that I think you're going to have to worry about too much. We're moving on into backgrounds. I look here, Resources 1, Mentor 1, and Remembrance 1, and Chimera 2. Remembrance and Resources, I don't have to pay that much attention to. It's great. You've got some extra cash floating around, and you've got Remembrance, which in Changeling is a trait that lets you kind of remember a little bit from past lives. These aren't things that I'm going to have to worry about too much because I don't have to write out his past lives for him. 1 dot basically means that at some point he might be able to access some help from past lives if he needs it, or it might come up in the context of a story and I can look and say, oh, he has Remembrance. I can feed it to him this way. But Chimera and Mentor are things that I'm going to have to dig a little bit deeper into. Why? Because they involve specifics. So if I look at Chimera and I look over here, I can see that he's got a chimerical shortbow and a chimerical knife in his equipment and treasures. I don't have a problem with him owning either of these things, but he's paid for them using the Chimera background. Are there other Chimera that I'm missing here?
No, and I wasn't quite sure because that's something that they did not bring over from the second edition book to Changeling 20 was the chart of how many dots in the background non-sentient Chimera cost. That actually doesn't appear in Changeling 20 anywhere.
It's a little strange. Were there other Chimera that you wanted to have?
Not immediately. Okay. That was also a number of this background point has to go somewhere.
I totally get you. So I think for Chimera 2, owning a shortbow and a chimerical knife, we'll also be able to say that you own some sets of chimerical clothing, otherwise known as wall, arrows, quiver, the stuff that would go with having a shortbow. You would have those as well. We're actually going to edit your equipment and treasures a little bit later, but for now, great on Chimera. What about your mentor? Who's that?
The mentor is the Boggin mentioned in his history, Falcon. I'm using the mentor in place of what would be an allies or contact dot because Falcon would know specifically Cathane related things.
Right.
Just a quick phone call but not show up in person kind of thing. Cool. They're not in the same area at all.
So in this game, we have specific rules surrounding what we call companions, which are NPCs that are kind of linked to your character. Having a mentor sort of falls under this in that you will totally be able to access your mentor and ask questions and stuff like that. You'd have to hit up a storyteller. You could also make mention of your mentor to other people without needing to talk to us. Like, it's part of your backstory, that's fine. If you ever needed help and you think your mentor could help out, you could be like, I have a mentor. Do you think that this will help me? And we can make a call, yes or no. The one thing that you can't do is you can't play your mentor. You can't describe going into the freehold and then your mentor follows along beside you and then you play both characters at once. Companions cannot have you cannot have direct control over a companion. The exception is like if you have a very basic chimerical companion, like a songbird who sits on your shoulder, that's okay. You can describe the songbird coming in or flying up to the rafters or singing a song or whatever, because that doesn't really change the game substantially. But another character could. Like, you can't control an NPC who then is like, I'm here to absorb any bullets that happen to fly your way. That we can't do.
I roll mentor to summon my human shield.
Exactly. So that's totally still useful from a character perspective to have a companion or a mentor or an ally or context or whatever, but just understand you cannot play them. Another example that I have actually in the player's guide that's upcoming is you can have, for instance, say you have retainers who are mortals who, help you out. You could have a retainer and be like, yeah, I have a chauffeur who drives me anywhere I need to go. That's fine. I have no problem with you even saying what the chauffeur does. But the chauffeur can't then come into the freehold and have a conversation with somebody. The chauffeur is more like, you can describe the chauffeur knocking on the door and saying, it's time to go. And then you're like, okay, I got to go. And then you leave because, again, that doesn't have a huge game impact. But otherwise, if it does have a huge game impact, that's a no. A storyteller has to play those characters. If we move on to your arts, I see that you've picked Paretics 1 and Wayfare 2. You have not sunk every single one of your bonus points into making sure that you have as many arts as possible. Again, if that's something that you choose to do, I'm not necessarily going to say no, but I have to know why. You also haven't chosen any arts that I have to highlight as something that we need to talk about. There are no currently...
no naming 5?
There's no currently restricted arts. You could take naming if you chose. But if you did, for instance, take naming 5, at this point I would probably bring up, so you understand that naming is something that's used rarely, and if you end up using naming to hurt somebody else and they find out, you're a smear on the pavement. Changelings don't like having their names fucked around with, and that no one trusts a namer who fucks around with somebody without a very good reason. So
right, yeah.
This is something that I'd bring up, being like, if this is the character you want to play, that's fine, but you might find that you're just never going to be using your arts because in polite company you shouldn't. Or understand that if you use your arts in this way, that it could cause problems for you later on, and then that would be a choice for you to make. Finally, it might raise a flag if you've done something like take naming 5. If your character isn't based around the fact that they know naming at that point, if they're more like, oh, I take naming 5 so that I can fuck with people, well, that's a flag that I will be like, I have to pay attention to this and find out more about what kind of character you're building. Because if your character concept is one designed to disrupt the game, I don't want it. If it's designed to disrupt the story, that's a different question. But if it's basically to come in and just mess things up and become an agent of chaos that really just makes everyone else's gaming life miserable, no. And Crosshair, I'm not talking about you. Yes, Fairly Gay, naming is something like if you decided that you needed to discover a villain's true name, if that was like truly the last resort to dealing with them, then that must be that. Like, I would love to see a session where a group of changelings grappled with the morality of messing with someone's name in that way. It's one thing to prank a mortal. It's another thing entirely to mess with a changeling's true name. So, so Wheezy is a very good example. Somebody using naming to make somebody speak a little less coherently, and that sort of undermined her. that was an interesting use of naming. It was also a safe use of naming because it wasn't so disruptive that it destroyed everything. And it was also, to a certain degree, temporary. But using like naming 5 to really screw with someone, that could get you hurt. So yeah, so Crosshair, it's not like if you come in and you're somebody who's counterculture, that's fine. If you come in and you're somebody who has some extreme views, that's okay, character-wise, I mean. But if you come in and your whole point is anytime somebody does something, I'm going to try to mess with it, no, because then you're not actually making the story better. Every player has a responsibility to do their utmost to make the game fun for everyone, not just themselves. If we look at your realms, Pook, standard kind of distribution, actor, fey, nature, and prop. Realms are not nearly as critical as they were in 2nd edition because you can spend glamour to make up for realms you don't have.
Yeah, I like reaching. I think that's really cool.
Whereas before you were just hosed. I mean, yeah, you can buy naming, Kung Fu Fenders. Just know it's one of those arts that if you abuse it, people might just be very, very upset with you. Would it be a flag to have only one art? No. Requiem Lost, absolutely not. It's a flag, but not necessarily a bad one if somebody had started the game with the 5th level of an art, which is absolutely possible. If you spend 10 of your 15 freebie points, you can have an art at 5. At that point, I'm going to ask you why you want that art at 5 and why your character is so specialized in that art right away. And if your answer is one that I can deal with, great. I'm not going to complain. But if you're like, I want to have this art at 5 and the only reason you can give me is because I didn't have anywhere to put my freebie points, I'll probably talk with you to either find a way to justify it in your backstory or to ask you to put the dots somewhere else. Somebody who controls an immense amount of power is never going to be just coincidental. It's never going to be like, oh yeah, I happen to have Sovereign 5. That's never, ever going to happen. If you have Sovereign 5, there's a reason. I want to know what that reason is, and I want to make sure that it'll fit in with the game. But it's very possible to find that reason, even at character creation. Your first 3 dots, if you have 3 in Wayfarer, totally fine. That's not even a flag. Like, that's not a problem at all. And honestly, 4th and 5th dots in an art they're not bad flags. They're like yellow flags. It's not a red flag. Let's have a look at your glamour, willpower, and banality. So your glamour at character creation starts at 4, but you are a wilder, so you have increased it to 5. You've chosen to put your glamour your bonus point as a wilder into glamour as opposed to willpower. Yes. Your willpower starts at 4, and that's where it is, and your banality starts at 3, and that's where it is. So nothing that I have to worry about in terms of your tempers here. Your nightmare automatically starts at 0. So nothing to worry about there in terms of mechanics. Looking at your thresholds and your antithesis, and we'll get into antithesis because Requiem asked for it. Your musing threshold is help those in need, and your ravaging threshold is break trust. These are ways in which changelings manipulate mortals in order to harvest glamour from them. Musing is in a way to encourage glamour in a human to the point where the excess goes to you. I'm simplifying here. And ravaging is the idea that you're basically shunting an intense emotion out of them to steal their glamour, which can leave them a little bit numb. Ravaging is not as polite to humans. The Sealy Code looks down on ravaging, although it isn't necessarily outlawed. The Unsealy Code says that ravaging is fine because mortals will be able to come up with more glamour anyway. These are fine. I'll remind you at this time that you will probably not get a whole lot of specialized musing and ravaging scenes from storytellers because we probably just won't have the time. If you're the only person in the server at any one point and a storyteller's like, hey, is there anything you want to do and you want to run through a musing or ravaging scene? You might do that. But otherwise, it's assumed that it's something that happens on your downtime. Make sense?
Yeah.
I'll also point out that your glamour regeneration is based on your dreamer's background, and you don't have any right now. You will still gain glamour, but you'll gain it slower than somebody who had the dreamer's background.
Yeah, and I hope to also work his personal reverie in at times.
Yep, absolutely. That's totally a thing. Obviously, again, it's not typically something that you're going to be able to poke a storyteller for and say, hey, so I did Reverie last night. Can I have glamour now? Like, we probably can't accommodate that. That's what the automatic regen is for. But if something occurs as part of a storyline, then that's something that we can accommodate for as well. And you're also perfectly allowed to describe how you were musing or ravaging or reverying or whatever to other people and just say that, yeah, this happened. Like, we're not going to force you to play those scenes for you to claim that they occurred. Rhapsodying, however, is something that you probably would have to consult a storyteller for. Rhapsodying is force-feeding a mortal glamour until they basically just spew tons of glamour out and you burn them out. It's like, it's basically overloading a mortal to the point where they can no longer contribute to the dreaming. So, then we have your antithesis, the willful destruction of knowledge. Your antithesis, every character, this is new to Changeling 20th, by the way. Every character has something that is so antithetical to how they connect with the dreaming that if they witness or experience this antithesis, it means that they have to roll to see if they gain banality. There are a lot of ways to gain banality. Killing another changeling can gain you banality. Spending a lot of time with your a lot of time at the SAEQ, which would be the Quebec equivalent of the DMV for Americans, or the Department of Motor Vehicles, can gain banality just because you're in such a boring, like, non-creative space for a really long time can gain you banality. But in this case, when you pick an antithesis, it's just something that rubs your character such the wrong way that they have to check to see if banality comes up. So in this case, Pook, you've picked as an antithesis for Naphian willful destruction of knowledge. So what would that mean? Like somebody destroying a book?
Yes. Something done in a way that, like, it could even be smashing a freaking USB stick at this point. Something that would take burning books, anything that would remove the ability for information to not be shared.
Right. So that means that if you witnessed that behavior, then that would be a problem. And you would have to roll for to see if your banality is triggered.
I was hoping that this was not going to be like too specific of an antithesis, but he is really driven by not only his thirst for knowledge, but eventually, as far as like pick an area of focus, he's eventually going to want to be teaching other people.
Yeah,
and so
absolutely not too much.
Okay.
It's definitely not specific enough. There's plenty of ways that knowledge can be destroyed. I will point out though that willful destruction of knowledge, to me, basically means either destroying knowledge out of ignorance, accident, or malevolence.
Yes.
Something like, oh, this book is so damaged that there's no saving it. If you come across a book that's just like been in a fire like 20 years ago, that's okay. I'm not going to be like, well, you have to roll now. And in much the same way that also, if I'm here at my computer and I'm like, wow, my hard drive's too full, I got to delete these files I don't need anymore.
Right.
That's not going to no, the data. Why are you formatting the hard drive?
The formatting the hard drive kills the character.
Yeah, exactly. That's not a problem. But if I'm like, oh yeah, I see that there's my master's thesis is on this drive and I don't have it backed up anywhere. And then somebody comes along and says, well, this master's thesis should never see the light of day, and they wipe the drive, that absolutely would trigger your antithesis.
Yes. Yes.
But if the guy, even if he had a backup somewhere, if somebody came along and willfully tried to destroy that knowledge, that would be a trigger.
Yes.
Even if they weren't successful. But that's a very specific case. I don't think it's going to come up that often, though. And thanks for the follow, Nylander.
And I still struggle with antithesis myself.
Yeah.
I mentioned this earlier because of the flip to banality. But I'm working on it.
Yep. It is new to C20 and it's something that we're working on, but pick something like good antithesis could be like Patch's antithesis, if I remember correctly, was the destruction of a machine, like a beautiful machine. Now that I say that, I'm wondering if I'm right. for Sophia, it was the destruction of beauty, and I think for Brahm it was cowardice. Like overt cowardice was something that he just could not handle well. So it can be.
Man.
Yeah,
no one shows Sophia the botch restoration job done on that painting. Oh no.
I don't really foresee that antithesis coming up really often unless someone is purposely targeting you and trying to force you into banality, which feels like a flag in and of itself. Oh, Sophia didn't like dirty stuff. That's right. Not the destruction of beauty. Sorry. Look, I've GM'd a lot of characters. I've been a storyteller for a long time. Details will elude me, so I appreciate that, Kung Fu Fenders, because I won't always remember everything. I do see that your antithesis isn't necessarily something that's going to come up all the time in a game like this, because you'll also be spending a lot of time in freeholds, and in freeholds, banality tends to be a little more at bay. But the destruction of knowledge, if a news report came on that said that a book has been banned from schools, that I would argue would probably count as a trigger. If someone said, there we go. I just have to make sure that this goes through. Yes. Okay. Sorry, I literally have food coming in. So
no worries.
To make sure that buzz came in, but thankfully I don't have to go and get it right now. So yeah, I would flag this antithesis if it felt like it would never come up. But I feel like if I want this antithesis to come up, I can trigger it if I wanted to. As a storyteller, I could make it happen if I needed it. But in general, it's not going to be something that will be present every day you play. If your antithesis was, I can't stand it when left-handed Lithuanian plumbers try to give me a secret handshake, then I would say that's not appropriate and you got to pick something better.
Yeah, and I didn't want to go the other extreme with it, with, spreading misinformation, because that might come up too often, especially around Abuka.
Right. So Osab asks, would something like the net neutrality rulings play into that antithesis? I would say that discussing net neutrality laws wouldn't, but if a severe blow against net neutrality occurred and it was presented directly to Nathian, then yes, that would probably be a trigger. Remember that also triggers are if you're exposed to it. So it wouldn't count if, for instance, Nathian traveled to a country he hadn't been to before and learned that in this country the internet is blocked. That wouldn't immediately trigger things because it's not like he witnessed the moment it happened, or found out shortly after they blocked the internet. So it would be, so a net neutrality thing, sure, like that is something that could trigger if they're like, it's become law today that in Canada you can no longer XYZ because net neutrality laws have been repealed. That would then be a potential trigger. But he wouldn't have to trigger it every time he heard about net neutrality, just the first time. Or if it got worse. Or if it got better and then got worse again. But your antithesis isn't something that is meant to be like all-consuming. And it won't be so all-consuming in the game either. And if you have an antithesis that you feel might trigger too often, at that point, you can work with a story. If I notice it and I'm like, whoa, that's going to happen all the time, I might work with you to try to find a more narrow focus. Like if this was too broad, then I might say it's the willful destruction of written knowledge, for instance. Like there are ways to make that more precise.
Don't throw away the sacred lore. It's a Nintendo Power magazine. I know what I said.
In looking at your character histories and all that, we're not going to delve too deeply into this because it's not necessarily for other people to know right away. But here's what I'd be looking at if I was sanctioning. I see that you have a mortal description. Great. I see you have a changeling description. Great. Your mortal identity and your changeling identity exist in order to make sure that you have an idea of what your character does in mortal society and changeling society. And the fact that you've got a changeling identity here of Nathian's too new to the area to have established much of a reputation just yet, that's all I need to know. That's fine. I'm new in town. that's an identity, and that will work just fine for me. So you also have a backstory, which is not 7 pages long. In our game, your backstory has to fit in this box, and if it doesn't, we'll ask you to shorten it. Your backstory could also be in point form, for all I care. What's more important to me is that your backstory contains elements of where you've come from and where you potentially want to go. And if you've overly described your character, then I don't know where your character can go. If you've written 7,000 words in a backstory, I can't remember 7,000 words times dozens of players. So I will probably say you need to cut this down. But so far this looks good. I'm not going to, I also did a glance at this and nothing in here was like, oh wow, this backstory is really troubling and I can't accept it.
Oh, you mean the part where he found that he was secretly High King David?
Nice. High King David is dead.
He's dead. He's dead.
I will point out that will be in the player's guide for people to know. But yeah, the High King is dead, and currently it is High Queen Lenore. Some quirks, definitely a good thing to have. This is really just sort of like a role-playing aid for you. Elements of Cotton Eye Joe. Motivations and goals, great to have. You have no current oaths. That's fine. But if you do ever swear an oath, it'll go right in your sheet, because oaths are important to changelings, and the consequences for breaking an oath are rather dire. An edgy lunar orphan assassin. I would be interested if a lunar showed up in this game. So there is actually only one thing about your character sheet that I would have to change, and that is your equipment and treasures. And the reason why is because I want to know what essentially Nathian's daily carry is. And by daily carry, I don't mean the edgelord, like, so what knife and what gun do you have at all times? What I mean is, like, do you carry around a purse with a bunch of like odds and ends in it? Do you have a car that you drive? Do you have a bat that you keep in the back of your car just in case? And the reason why we want to know this is that if you come into a scene and you're like, I pull a bat out, well, if you haven't, a bat's kind of a bad example because a bat's relatively easy to procure. But if you say things like, oh yeah, I happen to always have a set of plumber's tools on me, well, it's a little weird if you just randomly pull out some plumber's tools and we don't know that this is something that your character typically has. So what I might suggest that we put in here are, like, what kind of clothing would Nathian wear on a standard day? And it's fine, again, if you come in and you're like, today Nathian's dressed to the nines. Like, that's great. But knowing the basic stuff that he has is useful. So he probably carries a bit more than a short bow or a knife. Like, does he have a car? Does he have a metro pass? Does he have a cell phone? Does he have a comb that he carries with him at all times because he just got to look that good? These are the sorts of things that I'd be asking.
Okay. Yeah.
So I would probably then say, hey, so what are some things that you might want to carry? And, like, does he drive a car? Does he normally take, like, public transit?
I think in this case, it'd be public transit.
So he might have a metro pass.
Yeah.
Right. Anything else?
Actually, yes. I mentioned that he always carries a backpack with him. It's actually a bolt bag. It's got a change of clothes. It's probably always got a bottle of water in it. He likely has a Swiss Army knife in there. That might actually be the chimerical knife, to be honest.
So you see how I'm putting in here things like a backpack bolt bag with survival gear, change of clothes. It's also, if you ever decide to go into the freehold one day and you're like, I don't have my backpack today, that's fine. Like, we don't have to change your sheet just to reflect that. But it's reasonable to assume that you might have some survival gear and a change of clothes to go with you. So other than that, I don't see any other issues with this character. So what I would then do is, in the change log, I would say, I'm here. It is 2021, August 18th. I'll put my user in here. There's no XP change because you haven't spent XP. But I would say, looked at sheet, added some equipment, sanctioned, and initial sanction. So at this point, because your character is sanctioned, I would then assign you the appropriate roles on Discord to allow you to play. The way that we do this is that your character's pronouns are your role, because you'll have the opportunity to set your own pronouns as a role in the server, just so that someone can click on your name and find out what your player pronouns are. But your character's pronouns will either, like, we have the option of he, him, she, her, they, them. We might have some other ones, and if there's anything specific that you need, we can most likely add it. But then once we give that role to you, then it's clear that you have a character that's active, and therefore Discord will allow you to post in in-character areas, and that way someone can also click on your name in the server and look at your roles and find out, oh, your character is he, him.
Okay. I did take Brazinga. Yeah, that's a good question. I did take a professional skill for archery instead of taking firearm. I do know in the Changeling 20 book it says that archery falls under firearms, but I didn't want the character to actually have gun knowledge.
Yep. I should have mentioned that because, yeah, there is a custom skill in here, but archery is one that's actually listed also in the book as a potential professional skill if you wanted it, I think, even though it also fits under firearms, or even if not, then it's been mentioned in other books as well. I have no problem with you taking archery as a professional skill. I think it's great because, yeah, it also explains that your character might be very good at one thing, but not necessarily know much about guns. So if I ever made you do a firearms roll, and it was just for like a gun that was point and shoot, I might give you a little bit of consideration considering your archery dots, just because you're vaguely aware of things like aiming, calming your breathing, you have the strength to hold your arm up, but that would be a judgment call on my part if I decided that I wanted to give you a bonus to firearms as a result. But otherwise, no, archery is great to have.
Yeah, awesome.
So that's what a sanctioning looks like. I go over your sheet. I might ask some questions of the player to find out, like, oh, what is this? Or why have you done this? Make sure that things are listed appropriately. Like, for instance, I might also put here under mentor, whoops, not a comment. I might insert a note here, and the mentor is check background, so that I can then find that out later. And for Chimera, I might insert a note here that says chimerical shortbow and knife, so that I have those in there so that I can check that as well. But otherwise, yeah, this looks like a great character. I've accidentally given you a point of banality, and I shouldn't.
Oh no!
I really look forward to this. We might talk a little bit more if you ever come back on another clinic hours. We might talk a little bit more about things like, okay, so tell me about how your character would react in this particular situation if I was curious. But right now it looks like this is fine, and this character would be good to go for play. If you decided,
awesome.
if you decided later on, oh, I wonder whether I want to have more dots in one thing instead of another, or if you're like, I've decided that Nathan isn't actually about archery and he's more about firearms instead, then we would just make that switch. Because in the first week or so, I'm not going to care if we make switches, even in the first two, as long as it's a 1-for-1 switch.
All right, this was actually a ton of fun, and yes, anytime. I will gladly come on clinic hours anytime, or actually, like, whenever. Like,
look, there are even tips to find out information on how you can fill out your sheet even better.
Yeah, I really like that page.
Which is super cool. So, folks, that's kind of what it looks like to create a character. If you have any questions about Changeling, I know we didn't get the chance to cover nearly as much of it as there are. Ask on Discord. We'll also do more clinic hours on this subject to help people get up to speed, and we'll be able to keep this in line. But otherwise, that's kind of an idea of what's going on. In the next clinic hours, we'll probably go over more specific what it's going to look like on Discord. But for now, Tomorrow is going to be, normally it would have been clinic hours on a Thursday. Instead, it's going to be on my own personal channel, play a video game. It's probably either going to be Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster, or I might play Humankind, which is out and part of the Xbox Live Games Pass, so I have access to it. So we'll probably play a game at that point. On Friday is going to be Punchy with Punch Effect. Saturday, Drew Crew, Doomed. Sunday, Exalt Witch Academy, episode 5 in season 2. 6. Episode 6. We did 5. Which will be really cool also, if you could tune in, because we're definitely not stopping playing that. And it's heating up. Otherwise, thanks so much for tuning in. Join that Discord to ask any more questions, and I hope that we get a chance to see you play in Disconcordia when it launches, hopefully by the end of the month or at the beginning of next month. We'll see. We want to make sure that it's in a state that will be happy going into beta. But until then, you can always just use your word hole. Thanks a lot, Pook.
Thank you.